Good morning, everybody, and welcome to SIG this morning. I have a few things to talk about before we actually get going on the demonstration and so on. The first thing is I wanted to mention that we are setting up a tool sharpening class, and that Gary contacted the Norton company, and they are sending us a bunch of 8,000 stones to contribute to our sharpening class, and they've also asked us to test a couple of ceramic stones that they're sending to us. So that's going to be interesting, and we'll welcome their equipment to our classes. I also wanted to mention that we are trying to put, one of my functions here is that I'm involved in the education department. I'm involved a little bit in trying to plan and develop classes for the future. And one of the classes that we really want to put together is a sort of a step beyond the initial intro classes, so something that broadens people's ideas out. And we were thinking along the lines of something that's a combination of hand tools and machine tools, but with a specific focus towards the aspects of building shaker and arts and crafts furniture, mission furniture specifically. And it's just an idea we're kicking around. And I wonder if, I'd be interested to know if anyone out there would be interested in attending a class like that. And if your experience level is way beyond that, then what you think of the idea of the class as or even as a beginner, what you think of the idea of a class. And we're just kicking stuff around. It's part of our long-term vision, but we're trying to develop new classes. We've developed a new sharpening class, and we're going to do a finishing class. And you know that the intro class has expanded to include a cutting board class and mortise and tenon class already. So we're hoping to develop on from those skills. So anyway, we would really welcome you guys' ideas. And if any of you want to contribute towards that, in terms of your resources and ideas, I mean your resources as a woodworker and ideas, then we'd love to get you involved. And then the next thing that I want to talk about is, I guess, I just want to divert for a very quick moment. We hear a lot of talk about how mahogany has disappeared, and that there are lots of substitute mahoganies out there. Sapele is a very beautiful wood. You can buy Honduran mahogany. You can buy something called genuine mahogany, which is another species entirely from the original. But the original mahogany was Cuban mahogany. And this is Cuban mahogany. As far as I can tell, it came out of a piece that was probably somewhere between 120 and 150 years old. It was broken, came down through the family. And this is what it looks like. You can see on the inside, that's what it looks like when it's unfinished. And this is what it looks like with a little shellac on it. But personally, I don't see anything too special about it. It's nice to work, but it tears out. It's no different than many other woods. There's nothing that sets it aside for me, especially as what they used to do was stain this stuff anyway. And this is just as it is, and it's just one that I was doing some practice dovetails, and I put together, and I'll use that in the shop to keep something, But anyway, that's what real or original Cuban mahogany, which you just can't get these days, or if you can, it's been in the yard for the last 60, 70 years, and you're very lucky. But anyway, and then let's see, we're going to talk about dovetails today. So should we go to the slides? So I put together a few slides to talk about dovetails, which dovetails have been around for a long, long, long time. They found dovetail furniture in the Egyptian tombs, and there's evidence of dovetail furniture in ancient Chinese furniture as well. Traditionally, it's been used a lot for drawers, much like this box, because the nature of the construction is that it's something like a drawer. Oh, I'm trying to show you when I'm talking about slides. Something like a drawer, which you can see in this picture, is is going to put up with a lot of pulling in and out and in and out, so that the joints in this drawer need to be able to resist that and to not fall apart as a result of that. So the dovetail joint is a really good way of dealing with that, because it's a bit like if you can imagine your fingers crossing together and then bonding like real close to where they diverge, as it were. That's a really strong joint. And that's pretty much what a dovetail joint is. So let's move to the next slide. Okay, so there's a lot of talk about, do you need dovetails in today's world? We're able to manufacture drawers and so on in such a way that they really can, they're strong, they resist this pulling in and out and so on, and they're machine made, they're made quickly, and they're made of various different materials. So why do we do dovetails? There aren't that many totally justifiable reasons for doing it, except that something about us, we love them. There's something about the look of them. They can be made to be very decorative, and modern woodworkers who don't have to, who many of them don't have to make a living doing it, really enjoy doing them. You know, getting to do them well takes a little time, and I'm somewhere on that path. I think about a third of the way. But there is also a practical advantage if you're working in solid wood, because you can put together large planks of wood using dovetails. This is a toolbox that or tool chest that I'm just finishing up at the moment. And you can see there I'm cutting the tails. So that's one side of the dovetail joint. The next side is the pins, and you can see, you mark the tails, the pins off of the tails. So you cut the tails, or I cut the tails first. And there's all sorts of arguments about it, but I'm going to show you the way I do. So you've got a set of pins there, and you notice this board it's actually 24 inches wide, or somewhere between 22 and 24. I can't remember exactly. And it's made out of poplar, and even though poplar is a pretty stable wood, it moves. There's a little bit of movement in that. It moves 1/8 of an inch. I mean, I put it together, it was perfectly straight. A couple of days later, when the humidity had changed, it had bent a little bit, and I put it on the bench, and you could see 1/8 of an inch in the middle there. But when you make a dovetail joint, you eliminate that movement, as it were. So in solid wood, it's a great way to put together a chest that, should we move to the next slide? Let's see, oh, there are the dovetails being put together. Another advantage of dovetails is you usually only have to clamp in one direction. So the tails themselves pull the wood in to themselves, and I'll demonstrate that a little later. But you can see, don't worry about going back, but you could see there that my coil was over that 24 inches, was actually curved because there was so much pressure on the ends. It was the only way I could get nice even pressure across the tails, across the pins. But what it did was it put those pins, the piece with the pins in it, with the tails in it, nice and flat to the edge. So you came out with this. And as you can see that, it's satisfactory. This is all done with hide glue, by the way. So let's move to the next slide. Okay, and this is the end result, which is now full of tools. And you can see inside, the whole box is made out of poplar. Everything is dovetailed, all the skirts, all the edges, the drawers themselves are dovetailed. The only thing that isn't, there's mortise and tenon joints in the flat part of the lid.
Did you stain the drawers? Is that how you got it to be dark like that if it's all poplar?
No, I'm sorry. The drawers are made out of cherry. Rodney Allen gave me just some beautiful cherry, and so I made it out of those. Anyway, and then I painted it because I need it to be tough enough to take the bruising of being in the shop. That's what it looked like as it was being made, and you can see the skirts are dovetailed as well. The advantage of a dovetail on that corner over a mitre is that it won't open and close over the years. Mitre joints there could easily open and close, especially with being bruised on the corner and so on. This gives you a really tough corner that also helps to hold the the box itself nice and square. So let's move on to the next slide. Okay, so that's one of the drawers close up. As you can see, I'm getting better at dovetails, but I'm not even close to perfect. There are a number of different dovetails that I'll talk about in a minute, but this is the classic through dovetail. And it's unforgiving in the sense that any slight gaps in your cutting show. You can get really close to a through dovetail and see the slightest error and gaps in there. You know, whereas there are other kinds of dovetails where you conceal that and you still get that strength. But this enormous strength of the corner, of those two pieces of wood bonding together, is really important in a dovetail. So let's move on to the next one. Okay, and there it is with a few tools in it. And I'm starting to work out of it, and I'm finding it's really nice. I'm sort of transitioning from having pegboard on the wall to having most of the tools that especially the tools I want to keep away from any rust or weather, because there's a dust seal around the top. You know, it's a great box to keep stuff in and to work out of, because those drawers can be set and I can just reach in and get those tools at just about thigh height. So let's move on to the next one. Okay, so the way I was taught to make dovetails, we take two pieces of wood and you make sure that the ends are square in all directions. So you want 4 square on the wood itself, and then you want it to be square at the ends. So the way to get it square at the ends is to use a shooting board with an adapted plane there with the torpedo or whatever it's called, hot dog. This is a homemade hot dog on this one. But so you square your ends, and that makes making the dovetail easier, marking out the dovetail much, much easier. So you make sure that everything is square in all, well, I don't know, 8 directions, however many directions it is. And that both ends are going to fit together nicely. Okay, so that's my last slide, I believe. So now we're going to go to, I'm going to show you, first of all, a few other different dovetails that we actually have at the shop. Oh, cool. Great, thank you. Okay, so this is a dovetail that you might put into the aprons of something if you wanted to support, say, a floating tabletop, and you wanted a little gap between your frame and the tabletop itself. You might dovetail a cross piece in there in order to set your tabletop on that rather than setting it on the edges. And that way you can put in a bevel that gives you a gap. Many uses, but it's one kind of a dovetail called a mortise and tenon dovetail, or a dovetail tenon. So there's that. Then you have, this is 2 of the same kind of dovetails that we were looking at, through dovetails. Very nicely done, this one, very little in the way of gaps, which is difficult with poplar. Here's a half-blind dovetail. This is what you would use if your cross piece here was, say, a drawer front, and you were wanting to make, really on a drawer front, you don't want to show your dovetails, but it's nice to open a drawer and see them on the side, so you could open that drawer and see that. But it's called, it's like a half, it's got the same dovetails in there, but the pins are made, it's got the same dovetails there, but the pins are made by actually not going all the way through the wood. So any mistakes on that inside are forgiven, as long as you get it square. The other great beauty of a dovetail is its integral strength and the ability to, when you put it together, it stays square. So for example, it's inherently square. You only have to clamp in the one direction. So this one I glued together, and I only used a clamp on to hold the dovetail into the pins here, but inherently it squares off the joint there. So that's another really nice plus, because I don't know if you've ever tried to put a box together with band clamps or anything, but it's fiddly and it's unforgiving in terms of the way you put it together. Once you've carefully done dovetails, it's relatively easy to put together. But so here's one that's been glued up. Here's one that isn't glued. And as you can see, it holds together by itself. That's part of the key. It's got to be a pretty close fit. So this, I can just wiggle it out. It's a fairly close fit. There's still a few little gaps. Clamp will take care of some of that. But the real beauty and the real strength in the dovetail joint is the fact that you have long grain here going to long grain here, and the same over here to here. So you have an enormous exposure of long grain to long grain. And anyone out there know why we want that long grain to long grain exposure? When we glue it together, long grain to long grain gives you the best glue bond. If you don't glue it together like that, if, for example, long grain to end grain here, or end grain to end grain, is the worst bond of all. You know, that's why we have to spline things like mitered joints and so on, because it's a terrible joint. They're both end grain to end grain, or almost all end grain to end grain. So you don't have enormous strength down in here, but you have huge strength here. But you have, this is square, so that when you put the joint together, it's inherently square. It won't be perfectly square right now, but it doesn't take much to get it square. And so as you put 4 of those together and you tighten up the clamps in 2 directions, it gives you a really good bond. So, okay, so how do we do that? I'm going to, and I'm not going to pretend to have a real craftsman level of going here, but I'm going to show you. We'll move over to here and mostly work around the vise. I'm going to show you how I mark out and cut a dovetail joint. So I'm assuming you guys can see me. So the very first thing I have to do is, you remember I talked just a minute ago, oh, superb, great, about having a square end. So I've got my end here. You can see I've marked it okay, because the other end isn't squared off, but it's square that way, it's square that way, it's square that way, and all the way around. So I know it's square, which gives me a huge advantage, because the other piece, I need to determine the thickness of the other piece in order to determine the size of my dovetails. So I look at the thickness of the other piece. In this case, they're both the same piece of wood cut in half. So I know the thickness is the same. So I'm going to mark it out to the thickness of the piece of wood that's going to have pins in it, because that's what's going to, you know, that determines how the dovetails are going to be done. So I'm going to take my marking gauge. I'm going to make it a smidgen, just a smidgen above, beyond what the, I don't know if you noticed in that photograph of that box, but when it was glued together, but all of the dovetails protruded just a little bit. That's because I'm going to plane them down once it's all done. But I want a little extra on each side, so on the pins and the tails. So I take my marking gauge and I made it a little thicker than that. Now, because everything is square here, I can now mark it all the way around, and that is the base of my tail. Okay, so now I put it in a vise. Now, here's the key to making a dovetail joint. There are a couple of things to get right in the making the dovetail, but your angle of the dovetail doesn't have to be perfect, because you're going to take off from the dovetail, you're going to take off to the other piece. So it doesn't have to be absolutely perfect, but there are a couple of things that do have to be perfect in a dovetail joint. In this case, because it's a single joint, I'm going to, because it's a single joint, I'm not going to need to, it keeps it simple in terms of the cleaning out and so on. So what I'm going to do is cut my tail so that I have a pin that is a 1/4 inch getting thicker. So a 1/4 inch deep here. So my very first thing to do is to take a marking knife, not a pencil. If you want to make accurate dovetails, don't use a pencil, use a marking knife. This one was sent to me by John Rieger, one of our members. He got it, I'm not sure exactly where he got it, but it is a beautiful little marking knife. Perfect marking knife in so much as it has one flat back and it has 2 bevels here, so it can be switched to go left and right-handed. And the key to it is really the tip and guiding the tip. Tip does 2 things. It marks where you want to cut and it cuts the grain. Really critical, because that is what gives you those nice sharp edges. So in this case, I'm actually going to use that's not quite thick enough for that. So I'm just going to make a mark there, make another mark here. Okay, then I'm going to use a square to mark that across there. Always with a marking knife, you can start light. Remember, you're cutting grain, so it's just like cutting anything else. If you take a little at a time and go deep, it's much better than if you just jam that thing in there and mark it. So and the other thing you got to, when you're using one of these, you've got to always be thinking about, where is my finger? Because it's so easy to hold this thing with the tip of your finger in the way and do it a little bit of a mischief. So I get my square, cut across here, cutting away from my flesh if I can. And I've got a mark here. Okay, so now, I can't turn this around, but I'm going to be marking these sides. So you may need to move. There's a couple of different ways to mark them. You can, first of all, I would say you could come in and you can print your own dovetail markers on our 3D printer. You could also make them out of wood. I love these. These are, I forget where I got them, but they're made out of aluminum. Here's another that's commonly sold for $10 or $12. That'll work. I personally prefer these. They come in different sizes, different gradients rather. So for example, the general use for hardwood is a 1-in-8, a slightly shallower gradient, slightly smooth, what's the word, less radical dovetail, and traditionally in softwood it's 1-in-6, which is a slightly less radical, sorry. Anyway, I usually use the hardwood one. Doesn't really matter, I don't think, because not many people make dovetails in softwood these days anyway. But I got the pair because they came as part of a set. But I find these ergonomically easier to use than this thing, which you have to really get your eye down. So I got, now the key to this is to mark my dovetail, making sure that the dovetail is going in the right direction. So if I mark it like that, it's going to be wrong. But if I turn this over like that, I can line my dovetail up. I can line the marker up with my original line that was marked there. So I can actually take my marking knife and I can slide that baby over to it. And then I'm going to just feel my way. But if I was able to put my head this side of the camera, I would actually see where that line I cut earlier was. I can usually feel it. There it is. It's around there. Okay, so that's that side. I'm going to mark the other side while I'm here. Again, I'm going to get my knife into there. Oh, you're pushing it. And I'm going to mark that in there. Should do the same on the other side. If I get this right. Oh, nearly got your foot there. And that may have finished off my marking knife.
Oh, no.
It didn't. By good luck, it didn't. One of the things about getting a little older is arthritis sometimes makes you Again, this is a common way I can slice my thumb. So keep my thumb back because I've got to keep that guide firmly on there. Then I'm going to do the other. Oh,
Oh, you're only,
huh?
I just put two and two together on this.
You have to keep switching it around to make sure you get in the right spot. Now, when you're marking this out, you could, and many very experienced woodworkers do, not bother to mark the gradients. They've done it so many times, they can just do it by instinct. But what is absolutely critical is to get this cut here square. Whether you do it first with your saw cut and then trim, or you do your saw cut and then you trim quite a lot. Either way, you got to do it. Another thing I do is I mark the waist so that because it's common to accidentally go on the cut on the wrong side of the lines. And I'm also, for the benefit of you guys, I'm going to take this and I'm going to use my pencil marks to illustrate where I'm going to cut. Now, I didn't go all the way down there, but that'll be enough to show you. You try to drag the pencil tip through the groove, and that gives you, especially in low light conditions like my garage at nighttime, gives you a little bit more to cut to. Okay, so then this is not the ideal cutting height, but we're going to live with it. Now, there's a couple of different. Oh, there we go. Yeah, can we sort of rotate up? Yeah, there we go. Superb. Couple of different ways to cut this. There's many different ways. I'll back up. First of all, you can do all this by machine. There are machines out there that will do this or something darn close to it and just as strong. That'll actually make dovetails, not different kinds of joints, but dovetails. And Dallas will fill you in on all that if you need to know. But in terms of hand cutting, you've got to use a hand saw. It helps for many people to start out with a Japanese saw. I'm just transitioning to European saw, so that's what I'm going to use today. But a Japanese saw has the advantage of it. You pull it towards you, so you don't. It's in tension, so you don't need something that's really strong. You can have a really thin razor blade. And Japanese saws have multiple bevels cut on them that make them incredibly sharp and make them last for a long time. So but the real advantage to me is that you're able to pull the saw towards you when you're using it, which is really an advantage I found as a beginner anyway. I also have this little baby, which I use for little dovetails. And you can actually do a heck of a lot with a small, cheap dovetail like this. These cost like, less than $30, I think, for a small one like this. And you can do an awful lot of work with it. But I've been transitioning. You've seen me use, or some of you have seen me use hand saws before on the SIG here. But I recently bought myself a nice pair not dovetail saws. This is a dovetail, purpose built for dovetailing. It is a rip saw. Dovetail saws need to be a rip saw for cutting through here, because although you're not cutting along the grain, you are cutting along the grain because you're going to be cutting into the grain of the wood. So you are actually cutting along the grain. So you want a rip saw, and then you use the crosscut saw to take out the cheeks, which I'll show you in a little bit. So when you start, you probably don't want to cut to the line, but as you train yourself to work, you want to cut to the line. So I'm going to do my best. Like I say, I'm maybe less than the midpoint, I think, towards becoming a real craftsman with this. But I'm going to start my European saw by pulling it backwards. And I'm probably going to do a second pull there to line it up with my line there. Are you able to see that? Doesn't look very square from this side, but that's because I moved the saw when I put my head over there. But looking at this, you can see there's a slice in there, more or less along the line. I need to straighten it up a little bit, but I'm going to start working it. You notice I'm not putting a lot of effort into the saw. So now I've established my line, it's square, and I can go down. Now, I can make my own path up if I'm a really experienced craftsperson, but I'm going to just do my best to stay as close as I can to this line. And holding the saw very gently helps enormously. If you don't hold the saw gently, you tend to twist the saw as you cut. So I'm getting real close to my lines here. So not too bad, not perfect, but not too bad. Okay, so I'm going to do this on the other side. What you didn't see because of the camera angle was that I'm using my thumb to kind of guide the saw initially. There we are. So very, very gentle cuts until I've established that first cut. If you establish that first cut wrong, you got to correct it or you're going to be wrong all the way down. So I can't blow that out, blow the stuff out of there so you can see clearly. Oh, I can pull it out because of the mount.
Paul,
Okay, yes.
the Band-Aid on your finger and where your hand is currently positioned make me think that perhaps you maybe nicked yourself doing a dovetail.
Card scraper.
Oh, okay.
I didn't even know I'd done it. I was just using a card scraper the other day and I must have just held it along that edge that I warned people not to the last week.
It just happens right now to be positioned right there at the blade is why I was curious.
Yes, yes it is, but no, when I start cutting, I'll get out of the way. Okay. Okay. This is fairly new, so it catches sometimes. The other big advantage of a European saw is that you can train yourself to resharpen it, or you can be taught to resharpen it. Japanese saws, if they're really expensive ones, you send them back to Japan to get sharpened. But if they're not, you throw them away and you buy a new saw blade.
You turn it into a card scraper.
Yeah. Yes, exactly. That's what we do. And buy a new saw blade. Okay, so I was a little off my line on the back side there. But as I say, what's critical is that it's square, or maybe not far off. Okay, so now I've cut the tail. And now I will turn it around. And this, I'm just want to do a straight cut down. Okay. So that's basic cut, needs a little cleanup. So actually, I might as well do a little cleanup right now. You can actually glue that as it is right now. And I'm just going to take a teeny tiny little slice off of here, just to make sure. The other thing is I'm cleaning my corners as I go. Okay, so I make sure that that corner in there. This is why it's called a paring chisel, because it has the angles cut on the side, so you can get into dovetails, which they could be a lot sharper than this, but you can get into dovetails and you can get your corner right into the corner.
Paul, what's
Yeah.
the angle on that pairing? Is it 20 or 25?
I don't know.
You don't know. Okay.
I brought this from my dad's shop, so when he passed away. So I think it's probably 25. You mean on the bevel edge?
Yeah.
Yes, I tend to work at 25. I found that I've sharpened a few to 17, and the tips tend to break too easily. You know, the blade itself. What do you usually sharpen them to?
I'm just getting my first pairing chisel, and I was going to sharpen it to 20. So, but I will take your advice, your experience before I do anything.
Well, and even on a pairing chisel, I'll still do the micro bevel. So, you know, so really the micro bevel can be whatever angle you choose to put it at. But,
Yeah.
But yeah, but I'd love to hear how somebody does it 20. You know, I guess I figure I work with what works for me, and I don't change it if it works. Okay, and this is how they work. Okay, so I'm doing the same thing on this side, doing my best to actually cut the line. What I want to do. Now, this one's not going to pop out so easy because I didn't quite get all the way down. And again, I'm going to clean that joint in there. Obviously, when you're doing multiples of these, you have to work out a rhythm where perhaps you do a whole bunch of sewing and then a whole bunch of pairing. I might even, if I felt uncomfortable with, you know, about this angle here, I might even switch the angle that I'm pairing it at, around 90 degrees. In fact, I'm going to do that because it's a little easier. I'll turn it around so you guys can see. Oh, there we go. And that way, and I can use the existing. This is end grain, so there's no point in smoothing it off, really. You know, unless I need to in terms of making those shoulders there. All right, so that's, now, if in the cutting of this, one angle should be slightly different from another, it depends what you're making it for. If you're making it for pure decoration, then you want to pay super careful attention to it. If you're making it because what you want is to use the dovetail for the strength of the joint, then you don't have to worry about those angles, because what you want, you know, like say with my chest there, you know, if an angle's slightly off, it doesn't matter, I'm going to paint it. So, you know, nobody's going to get a chance to look at that and go, huh. Okay, so now this is where we have, everything now has to doggedly follow the profile of this. So the next thing that I do, take my next OK one, which again is squared off in all directions. And I'm going to mark it. Normally, if I'm at home, I'll find a way to, my vise is obviously normally, what's the word? At the same level as the edge of my bench. So I will put this in my vise at home, and then I will clamp. I'll clamp the tail that you see. I don't know if that tail's the same angle, but anyway, we're going to go with it. It certainly went pretty close to the line. So the other thing about cleaning this before you mark these pins out is you want to be finished with making this before you move on to the pins, because once you mark the pins, you cut the pins to fit the mortise. You don't cut the mortise to fit the pins, because if you start moving more than one variable, you end up, you can double the direction, the wrong direction as well as the right direction. So initially you want to change one variable at a time. So get your mortise, you get your tail rather done, and then once it's finished, don't change it. You know, make sure that your shoulders here are pretty parallel. I might need to clean that edge up. The other thing that commonly I do is I'll put a little rabbit on the inside edge of the mortise there, and that helps me to guide it as I mark it. But normally I'm going to clamp this because I might have 6 or 7 of these. I make a pencil mark, so if I do accidentally move it, I know where it's like that. I know where it's going to be. So I'll put my mortise. The other thing I want to do is make sure that I know which side is going down. So what do I do here? I'll put doesn't matter what it is, just some kind of symbol. We'll put an X there and an X there. And I know that those are, that I'm going to be able to, and that I'm going to have that face down. Okay, so I mark that out with pencil, get it back in place, ideally clamp it, make sure it's all square, and mark it gently at first. Make that first line very gently, but it is important to have this edge flat against there. Okay, now let me check. I've made 3 lines there, so I've got to be sure which one I want. It's this one, because I moved it as I was talking. Then I can check it against my pencil line. Okay. So now I'm going to use my pencil to make sure that I marked the correct line there. I mean that I cut at the correct line. And if anything, I'm going to err on making my hole smaller rather than bigger so that I can cut stuff away. So I think I'm at all out. Okay, and then I'm going to make sure I mark this here. Because I do not want to, I can't tell you how many times I've cut the wrong side of the line. And if it's a piece of wood that you spend a bit of money on, it'll tick you off. Okay, now I mark those lines, but now what I want to do is make sure that I mark the lines square down. Oh, you know, I've got to back up because I'm moving too fast. Should have done these both together. I got to mark my baseline again for the pins. Now, many of us leave the marks on there, on the outside, you know, on the visible side of the dovetails to kind of, you know, there's a school of thought that thinks show off that I'm a hand worker and all of that fun stuff. I don't feel that need, so I tend to plane that. I tend to make my piece with the allowance that I'm going to plane off that line, and because I'm already planing down to the surface, and do my finish planing for the edge, for the face of the drawer, as it were, or whatever it is. I'll do that, you know, after I've made and glued the dovetails. So I've got that base marked around 4 sides. Okay, so now I know which my baseline is to go to. So I'm going to mark that in here, remembering that I'm going to plane it off. If you have really good lighting in your shop, you need a really sharp pencil as well to do this. So if you have really good lighting in your shop, you can work without marking the pencil mark. And of course your vision is, but because I'm on live, my hands are a little wobbly. The best thing is to drag the pencil through it. Okay, so now what I'm going to do is I'm going to mark where I'm going to cut it downwards. So I'm going to again center it in my pin. This time I'm using a little square. Again, another common way to nick the end of your finger off is to put it just a little too far out there. And then again, I'll make sure I'm not going to cut myself. Make sure I'm lined up correctly. Okay. And then I'm going to go now in here. I go around. And Again, we're marking this out so very carefully for two reasons. One is to get it, obviously, just to get it right. But also, using this knife, I'm cutting the edges. I'm cutting where I'm going to cut. I'm already putting a sharp, clean edge there, so that if I cut on the inside of it, then I can pare to that edge. And same up here. It just really, really helps. And it also guides your saw. So now I'm going to, again, just pull the pencil up through those lines. Did we have some questions? I thought I heard a bing. Okay. So back to that's the cross cut. And this, I can't tell you how many times I've gone right here and gone, and then very carefully and very precisely cut on the wrong side of the line. So when you're about to cut, it's worth stopping and going, exactly where am I going to cut? Okay, so I'm going to line up with that nice pencil line slash. Okay, so now I've cut my guideline there, as it were, and I'm going to cut straight down through here. And you can see it's at an angle because obviously it's going to have the dovetail coming into it. You don't have to go right to the line. As you do them more and more, you just try and, you know, decrease the tolerances each time. And it saves you time going through and chiseling it out later. How are we doing on time? It's 10 to 11. Okay, we're doing good. I'm going to just digress for a moment. So I was told something by Rodney, a fellow member of the shop, a little while ago. We've both been trying to improve our hand tool skills as time goes by. And he bought a couple of nice saws, and he's been working with them. And he said he read something that was really, really helpful and helped him to start doing accurate cuts with this. And that is that when you're holding the saw, imagine you have an egg right here in the palm of your hand and treat it as if it were an egg. And you would be astonished how much of the wiggle your muscles put into it. By doing that, you're treating it like you're babying it, and you're just using the saw teeth to cut. So if you ever decide you're going to negotiate European saws, they're just really satisfying to use. But that's the key to use, especially on a dovetail, is to treat it with respect. Okay, so now another thing that I quite commonly do, because I've already just cut a mortise, is I'll flip this sucker over and I'll cut these pins off, which is not what I want to do. That's not what I'm here for. So what I want to do is take out this middle piece. And I'm going to use another traditional woodworking tool, the coping saw, or actually the more traditional saw is the bow saw. And the coping saw came along with metal frames and so on, but I'm making a bow saw at the moment, so I'm going to report back to you guys on that in a while. But the coping saw is a really good way to move all this waste I want to remove without going too far. So I'm going to start. This one you have with a coping saw. You have a choice. You can have it pull back or pull forward. I chose pull back on this. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to cut down here. I'm going to cut across. I'm going to start my cut straight. And then as I get down to the line, to that baseline, I'm going to start angling across to allow for the fact that we have an angle here for the dovetail. So
I'm sorry, Paul.
I've got to remember, yeah.
Paul, what
Yes.
would be the profile of the cut if you were to go to one of the two faces, and I could see where your blade is starting?
Yeah.
If we looked at it from the 2-inch side of that board, what would the pattern be as you're going down towards the scored baseline there? Would you be?
I'll show you.
Yeah.
Which can you see this side?
As soon as yeah, there we are.
Start here, and I will cut down to there.
That's what I was asking for. Thank you.
Yeah. It doesn't matter where in the cut I do it, so it's a matter of personal choice. Again, holding this thing and letting the saw do the work. It needs a little pressure, but if you put too much pressure, the saw itself bends. This, by the way, is a Olson coping saw, the best one I've ever come across, and it cost me about $14 plus postage. But it's got a couple of big advantages. This is, instead of being round, it's flat, so it retains tension really well, and it has adjustable tension, which many coping saws don't have, so you can adjust it here.
And what was the brand again?
Olson, O-L-S-E-N, like the billiards.
Got it. Thank you.
So I'm getting close to my line. I'm going to check. Okay, and I just now need to remember that I do have an angle here. I'm going to try and cut along the baseline as close as I can. Okay, so at this point, it's not a complete joint, but I can take a look and see if it's at least going to fit. Well, looks like I cut something wrong, but I also think I may have this upside down. Yeah, there's the fit. Needs a little work, but it's gonna fit.
Considering you haven't cleaned out the bottom.
Sorry?
Considering we haven't cleaned out the bottom.
Considering I haven't cleaned out the bottom. It's
Yeah.
actually pushing. I heard a little creak as I pushed that. I think it's pushing this out, which leads me or segues me into the reason why, and I have seen and been guilty of putting it here thinking, oh, it's a pretty good fit. Tap it down to make it fit. And
Oh no. Oh no.
And if that's a piece, it's the fourth piece of a drawer that you now have to go out and buy a new piece of wood and make sure it matches the color of the old one and all that fun stuff. It's a little frustrating. Or of course you glue it up or you find a way around it. So I need to make sure that this goes down as a reasonable fit. And I can feel it pushing over here. And I can also notice that my line's a little thicker here than it is here. So before I even clean out the bottom, I'm just going to try cleaning up those faces a little bit. Just take a little bit. My device is allowing it to move. I'm really pushing the limits of what you can do in a carving vise here. I think a lot of people wouldn't want to work like this. But for a single demo, notice as I use the chisel blade, I'm sliding it sideways. It's a great way to avoid tear out. You see, I got tear out there. Now, that's on the inside, so it doesn't matter so much. But obviously, I try to avoid it. But in this case, I'm going to have a good strong joint anyway. So I've cleaned that out just a smidgen. But the cure to not doing that would be to come over and finish that up using the cleaned edge as a register to come over. And, you got to remember to do it. I'll just clean this up a little bit. And we'll see if it's even a slightly better fit. A little better. It's not all the way down, of course. It's actually sliding in quite nicely. Do you see that tiny little bit made a huge difference in terms of how I can slide it in and out. And when you're doing these, if you've got tight spots, you're going to start seeing little marks, especially if you put if it's tight and you can't for the life of you figure out why it's tight, put some pencil marks on, and wherever the two faces are rubbing, they'll smudge the pencil mark. And then you know, okay, that's a high point. I can just slice that off. So that's not doing it there, but that's a way to tell. Okay, so at this point, trying to think the best way I can do this, and I think I have to take the vise off to do my next little section. So bear with me. Oh, we're at 11, so yeah, 5 minutes work should get us there. I'll let you know when it's loose. Okay. All righty. So, where did I put them? Oh, that one's still in the vise. That's why. Oh, best laid plans. All right. We've got that and we've got that. What I need is some chisels, a backer board of some kind, and a vise. Okay, now you can see that at the bottom here, I've got some to take out. I've got some to take out there. If I was at home, I would probably have gone just a little deeper than that, but the light's not perfect here and so on, but we're going to take this out. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to work from the side that's going to be exposed. I've already got that line cut by my guide there, but I'm going to work back to that line, working inwards there to get that. I'll then have to go back and trim this side, but I'll have trimmed this side and I'll know it's nice and clean. So
Paul, are you gonna work in from both sides?
Yes.
So you're not gonna necessarily try to go all the way through. You're gonna make sure that the outer edges are clean and you're taking advantage of your scoring line. And if there's a mound in the middle, you'll take care of that separately.
Let's just watch.
Okay.
Okay. Because I'm going to do both. Both to answer your first question, yes, both. Now I just do this because I find it's, in particular, I'm sorry, we're probably going to have to change the camera angle because I need to get it to where I can see really clearly and I didn't set it up right. I'm going to need to work in, there we go. As long as that, I think we can work with that, yeah. Okay, so this is quite a thick piece to cut. So one trick that I use is I start by just making some down cuts. I'm not big on chiseling out mortise and tenon joints. I mean dovetail joints. Okay. And I'm not big on using hammers on them either, which is why it becomes a body sport at this point. So now I'm going to use just my 1/2 inch. Okay, so that's trying to take too thick a cut. It won't even go down. You hear that lovely slicing noise? Notice that my chisel is angled to allow for the angle of the dovetail there. What I'm doing in order to work this is I'm basically using my sternum to give me the force. So I'm using my weight rather than hammering it, because hammering bruises the fibers. And this is slow. And some people love to chop stuff, with a hammer. Okay, so I'm getting back to my line. So now I want to get one part, probably the middle, right to the line. And go all the way back. But I'm going to change, if I'm finding, if the wood's a little hard, and I don't want to go to a hammer, and sometimes you have to, if the wood's a little hard, this is pretty soft wood, but not hard enough, I'll just take a smaller, a less wide chisel and work my way back. Notice I put a nice piece of hardwood. Right, now I should get a cut. Nope. I didn't even bring a hammer with me. Okay. So this points out this blade is not too sharp, and I don't have anything to sharpen it with. But when you're cutting dovetails, you've got to have very, very sharp blades, because you're actually cutting the fibers. You don't want to, as it were, compress the fibers. Okay, once I have it back to that line, it becomes a relatively easy job to cut the rest out, because I've got the line to refer to. And I can take it out just a little at a time. So I use the line. I can even use a 3/4 inch if I make it wide enough. But the wider the chisel, the easier it is to register to your line. Do you see how closely that is fitting to the line there? And because the line was previously cut, it's already there.
Yeah.
So now I can use the combination of my sight lines and this baseline to give me something close to a flat surface. Okay, so now I know that on my outside edge, on this edge here, I have a nice clean line. Now, we're running short on time, so I'm going to kind of rough finish this, just show you the rest of the process rather than trying to make it perfect. But here's the point. The real point for me is that I've cut that clean line. I'm not going to cut anything away from there anymore, so I'm not going to risk the tear out. So I didn't cut all the way straight horizontal. Now you can cut vertical, and you can even use a piece of wood to guide your chisel vertical. I don't like to do that because on the inside, it doesn't matter so much, the clean line, it should be great. But as I mentioned before, there's a rabbit and so on that goes on here. So
is there a reason you wouldn't use a rasp?
On this? Yeah. Because using a rasp won't give you the clean lines. At this point, you're trying to get a fairly fine fit. So now you can see here, just here, that I didn't even get across to the line there. So I can just finish that up with my saw line there. I was a little off on the saw line, which is why the fit is not perfect. But now there's not a lot to this because I've taken most of the wood out. So usually I can just start going in. And again, I work back to that line. Now, the thing I got to remember is, as I cut this out, everything going straight down is going to be nice and clean. But as I get over to this side, I got to remember there's an angle. I love that sound as the chisel hits the wood underneath. Then I can go in here, clean that out a little bit. Again, lots of sight lines. And if you're ever in doubt about whether something is square, if you have a little engineer square or a small square like this, you can go in and check, you know, and you can also check for straight lines and such like, but you can go in here and check for the square. Okay, so I'm going to finish this up. I'm going to come in and clean that line up there so that now I've got a straight line all the way down here and start cleaning that stuff out. Okay, once I'm back to the line, I'm going to make sure I go down here. And there's a danger here if you get the angle wrong that you push out some of the wood on the side. So it's always worth just thinking about that angle. And don't try to do all your cleaning down at this level. Get it in a vise and clean it up. Okay, we're running out of time for me to do a complete cleanup. But you can see that we're getting close to something that may not be a superb looking joint, but it sure will be strong when it's done. There's some, again, wrong side up. That's a little better there. I've still got some work to do down here, but you can see we have a pretty good joint. Not perfect. You do, oh God, there's a chasm in there. See, I think that was just trying to hurry things too much. And there was a different angle here because I can see my initial line mark.
Yeah, the beauty is though that was the side of a drawer, so nobody's going to see it.
Well, yes, and then if and if you put a veneer or something on the front, then it'll be different anyway. So no, that's not perfect, but it needs a little work. And the one fatal thing that I did was that, well, I say fatal, it'll work. It's a perfectly strong joint. And by the time you add some glue in there, it'll expand the fibers a little bit, but that's not really, I would throw that away and do it again.
Hey, Paul?
Yes.
When you started this today, you talked about the strength of these things, and it really made sense when you were talking about the long grain to long grain gluing, that it would be strong. I tell you though, that just as a casual observer, the thing that impresses me most about dovetails is the visual impact of it. It's such an elegant thing. And yet, if I saw your tool chest correctly, it seems as though you've covered all that. Is that true? Are your dovetail joints on that tool chest of yours not visible on the outside? Are they covered somehow?
They're completely painted over, yeah.
Why would anybody do that to themselves? All the beautiful work you did.
Well, it covers up for little mistakes like this. Believe me, if I make a mistake like that in a run of 13 dovetails, I'm going to figure out a way to get past it.
Okay.
If I were going to paint it, I might even put a little slice of wood in there, a little piece of veneer or something.
Yeah.
So, you know, you don't always want, if it's not perfect, you don't want to show it off. But
so you painted it to mask your learning mistakes, but you also developed your skill in the process.
I didn't actually paint it to mask my learning mistakes, because I was always intending to paint it. In fact, the painting story, I thought I was going to try milk paint. I tried red milk paint, didn't work. I didn't like the color. I tried I made my own color of milk paint. And by the time I got to about 5 coats of milk paint, I was done with milk paint. It was, you know, and so I went to Sherwin-Williams and got some green paint, and away we went. And the reason it's painted is because it's a tool chest, it's a working tool chest, and it's meant to look battered. So it's not there to show the woodwork off, it's there to be a practical tool chest. And if you paint something, it doesn't show the dings so easily.
What was its actual dimension for?
I'm sorry?
What was the dimension of the toolbox?
It is, total dimensions are, so it's about 26 or 27 inches high and 24 inches. The inside dimensions are about 22 by 24.
And just because we are on the digression into that toolbox, you said it was a working toolbox and that you were keeping more tools in it and off of the wall, made me think that you could have easy access to all the layers. Is that because the drawers slide front to back and you can get access to everything in the box easily?
Absolutely. It's every single compartment and tool of that is available to you without having to take anything out. You don't, if you look at, say, that wonderful, wonderful tool chest that piano maker, we've got a poster of it back here. Every tool has its spot and so on, but you would have to carefully go and remove it from the spot that it's in. And sometimes you've got to open 2 or 3 doors. With this, you just slide the drawer and reach down. Plus, at just the right height to lean on is the top edge of the chest. So I thought it might be an interesting future thing that I'd probably do this from my garage at home, where I'd just run through the chest and then show you filling it up.
Oh, that'd be great. Oh yeah. Does this chest have a name? Is it a particular design?
Yes, it is. It is based on a very traditional design. Some craftspeople would put in a little chest of drawers across where those trays are that I have. But it is a traditional design, and it's known as, or the design is, the anarchist tool chest. And it's the anarchist's tool chest.
Anarchist, okay.
Yeah, the anarchist's tool chest. And it's written by a guy called Christopher Schwartz, who used to be an editor of Popular Woodworking. And he actually has started his own book publishing company called Lost Art Press. And the Anarchist Tool Chest is an excellent book. It's all about, it contains basically what hand tools do I need and what do I need to keep them in. And you learn a lot of skills just by making the thing. And to try and explain the anarchist thing, he's not trying to change the world or turn the world to chaos. What he's trying to do is, he calls himself an aesthetic anarchist, that he goes for simple designs of furniture, and you know, where the design looks beautiful, but the function is important to it, and he just doesn't want to come up with the same stuff that everyone else has come up with in terms of his furniture designs and so on. But he doesn't want to get really ornate.
He was one of our fall presenters a few years ago.
Oh, was he really? Was it a good presentation?
Yeah, everybody got a copy of his book that went there too.
Oh, they did?
Book. Yeah.
That's why everybody was talking about it at Palomar when I bought it.
Yeah.
Well, when I bought it, I'm sorry, go ahead.
I was just going to ask if in his design, did he do the dovetails for all the joints, or was that your embellishment?
Oh, no, he designed it to be done dovetails. He's actually come up with a design you can do with plywood as well. So he recognized it. Apparently, when he wrote the book, he didn't know that people were actually going to make this tool chest. He thought it was just a neat book to write. And Oh, there you go. The anarchist design book. Yeah. Whole bunch. Yeah. He didn't know that people were actually going to make this thing, and they did. So I believe he's also published a modified version of it, and he's published a design for a version that can be made with plywood for those who don't want to go through this trouble. Which realistically, it took me a long time, but I sure appreciate Dovetails a bit more now.
No doubt. There we have it.
Yeah. Yes, that design book is worth going through as well. I've used his design book to help me design stuff, and he's also got another interesting approach, because his approach is, many of us get a little purist about our hardware and so on, and we try to use screws as little as possible and use nails as little as possible. And Chris's viewpoint is, if the nail is the best thing for the job, use a nail. So there are nails in that tool chest. The whole thing's put together with hide glue, so I can take it to pieces if I want.
Cool.
All righty. Any other questions or comments?
I have a question about chisels generally.
Yes.
As someone who has no chisels, where's a good place to start? If I want to learn how to do this, the dovetailing.
If you wanted to learn how to do, I would say you don't have to buy a whole kit. It is really helpful to have a 1/4 inch. I find that very, very helpful. A 1/2 inch and a 3/4 inch. They should be paring chisels. I'm not going, these are all old. These are old Marples, I think. But Stanley make a nice set of socket chisels. We have a set of them in the shop. They're made out of a really nice steel, and they're paring chisels, and they're a reasonable price compared to many of the others. So I don't usually recommend modern Stanley equipment, but their set of chisels are really nice. They do have the wooden handles in them, so fitted into the sockets. So you have to allow for the seasonal expansion and contraction of the wood, but that's easily fixed by creating little habits.
In addition to the chisels, I think it was just the coping saw and the scoring knife that you used, aside from the clamps, right? That was it?
Yes, the coping saw and the saws themselves. And as I say, you can buy the little, if you're just getting started, I would just buy something like this to see if you really want to do it. The disadvantage of a short blade is it doesn't cut very fast, but it's easy to keep in good shape and easy to look after. So you don't have to have a cross cut and a rip saw like I have. Just this one saw will do it.
And what did you call that one versatile saw?
This one? It's a Japanese dovetail saw. I think it's about a 7-inch blade.
Okay.
I'm having a little bit of a problem pronouncing that, but any of you speak Japanese? It's a 150. I believe I either got it from Woodcraft or Highland Woodworking, which I've mentioned before. They're available all over the place. Rockler also sells some nice tools, nice Japanese tools. Again, there's a whole range, but most of what's sold is in the cheaper range. I wouldn't spend more than, I think I spent about $60 for this one. And you can replace the handles. I mean, not the handles, the blades. You can buy a new blade for about 2/3 of that price. You want a marking gauge?
Oh, yes.
And like I say, I remember when I did all those masks and so on, there was a little for the 3D printer, there was a little 3D, a little file there that had dovetail angles in there. So you could always print that up on 3D, or you could buy something like this for a few dollars. I'm just trying to think. I'll bet you I've missed something, but that's the other thing that you will want if you actually get into dovetails and you want to lay out more than one or two is a divider. It makes a world of difference because you set up basically you set up the size of your tail, and then you work it across, and you do a couple of calculations to allow for the pins on the end, and then you just set it up, and that way you transfer. When you transfer measurements by eye, it's very easy to make a little mistake. With this, you'll have a sharp point and you transfer the measurements with a sharp point. It really works well.
Hey, Paul, I had a question in that regard. So
Yeah.
is there guidelines for how you lay out the spacing for your dovetails?
There are all sorts of methods and so on. I haven't worked out a perfect method, but what works for me usually is, let me see if I've got something a little wider. This is plywood, but you can see I usually will work out how far in I want my pins to go, right? So this would be, if I were marking this out as a dovetail, I'm marking out that first tail right there and there. And then I would measure the distance between these two and divide it by how many dovetails I want. So I'd measure the difference, say this was 4 inches and I want 4 dovetails. I would set my dividers at 1 inch. And I would take and I'd mark across there, 1 inch, 1, 2, 3. Okay, we got 3. And again, sometimes you've got to jiggle around with the dividers, you know, to get the measurements just right. But that's just fine. What it should do is I should end up with this pin there. And then what I do is I set how wide do I want the pins to be in between, and then go back the other way. That way I've marked out the width of the dovetails and I've marked out the width of the pins in between. So it's just a case of shifting it over. But I have not worked out the perfect way. Now, this is just for dovetails that are the same size. And a lot of people would say, what the heck is the point in doing dovetails that are the same size? Well, if you're going to paint them, it doesn't matter. They're not going to be shown off anyway. But I honestly don't think I'll be doing, you know, doing a whole bunch of dovetails just for the sake of it in future. I'll only do it when I need to. But I do want to just get to that point where I can do them without thinking about it. And the layout thing, I haven't figured out a perfect way for me yet.
Okay, thank you.
But there's lots and lots of stuff on the internet out there. Wow, we're 11:25. Any final questions? All righty. Okay. Well, I'll see if we can figure out a way to do that tool chest thing. And then I think once we've done the tool chest test, I'd like to start back to sharpening. Maybe do another wet sharpening session where we do the Tormek. And feel free, if any of you guys have input about that potential class that we're thinking about putting together, then feel free to send stuff to me. We'd welcome your input. But we're trying to create an education program that helps new woodworkers to sort of climb the ladder of the craft, as it were, and to try and make it interesting for them at the same time. So that's our primary objective with that class. So thank you so much for checking in. Thank you to Lewis for coming in and producing this. And we look forward to seeing you next month.
Thank you, Paul.
Thank you.